Hi, folks. Now, we've talked recently about the poisons of leftism, and it's something that has become increasingly obvious in our culture. I'm talking about everything from assassination attempts to successful assassinations, from vandalism and rioting to straight up activist politicking instead of actually representing the public's interest. The left has captured most of the major institutions, from big tech to media to academia to entertainment, and a good chunk of the bureaucracy. And the result has just been utter chaos. Their mission isn't hidden either. It's to undo the fabric of this nation and bring about the Marxist revolution they dream about so dearly, under the illusion that they'll install themselves in power once it happens. Now, history has shown us otherwise, that these scenarios usually end up playing out with the revolutionaries eating their own. They never unfold the way these revolutionaries think they will. Now, today, we're going to focus on one specific head of that hydra that's reared up in the last few days and weeks, the leftist justification and, in some corners, celebration of violence. For the better part of the last decade, the left has sold itself as a side of empathy and rationality, the side that cares. Their policies are couched in hand-me-down language about egalitarianism, borrowed from classical liberalism, but it isn't egalitarian. In fact, it's very much an inversion of that. I mean, just look at the intersectional pyramid that they teach. It's a moral ranking system that declares some people perpetual victims and others perpetual oppressors. Once you do that, cruelty against the oppressor category starts getting rebranded as justice. That is the opposite of equality, folks, and it's a direct attempt to upend every institution and principle that made Western civilization as successful as it became as quickly as it did. Now, there is no clearer example of that inversion than the people who publicly celebrated Charlie Kirk's death. That was real. It wasn't one troll. It wasn't an isolated edge case. We saw it across TikTok and elsewhere. Gleeful, revolting clips that are honestly hard to watch without feeling anger rise in your chest. And I don't mean a hot anger, blind anger that causes you to lash out. I mean a righteous anger, the kind many Christians felt after Charlie's assassination, the kind of anger that calls you to act not violently like the left too often chooses, but constructively and courageously to change things for the better. You know, organize, vote, build institutions, defend free speech, tell the truth, and live it. Now, let's talk about one particularly grotesque specimen of this trend. A self-anointed leftist named Ryan Beard recently put out a video titled, "Is it bad to celebrate Charlie Kirk's death?" Even in the title, you feel the moral relativism oozing out. The premise treats good and evil like flavors of ice cream. You know, pick whichever you like, as if celebrating a political assassination could ever be morally neutral. Let's just be clear for a second, folks. Celebrating the ruthless, theatrical murder of a man, a husband, a father, whose job was speaking to the public is evil, period. And you want to hear the galling contrast, folks, because I got it for you, okay? Because these same folks, these same leftists who turn a man's assassination into a morality play about their hurt feelings are the same ones who cheer policies that put violent repeat offenders back on the streets. We've all seen where that goes, by the way. Just look at the case of Irina Zarutska, the young Ukrainian refugee murdered on a light rail train by a man with a long history of arrests and releases. That's the system these leftists defend, a revolving door that sacrifices the innocent. But when it comes to someone like Charlie, well, who never laid a hand on anyone and made a living giving people, including his critics, a platform to argue with him, suddenly the empathy crowd can't contain its joy. That tells you everything about the moral compass that we're dealing with here, folks. And by the way, I do not want to overlook this, okay? Because part of what Charlie did was platform his opponents. He invited leftists into debates, posted them, and very often posted them uncut. Agree or disagree with him, his work was argument in the public square, not violence in the streets. But that said, look, we're not here to relitigate every aspect of Charlie's career. We're here to examine how leftists like Ryan responded to his death and why they ended up hosting a struggle session over whether it's okay to feel glee when a man is assassinated. That is what happens when a movement is ruled by feelings instead of reason, folks. Grievance instead of any sort of objective truth. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to be watching Ryan's video together, and we're going to break it down point by point. And I want to flag something up front. Ryan uploaded this video as a members-only video, meaning it's behind a paywall. Now, there's a reason for that. He knew the title was provocative. He knew it would bait clicks and bring people past the paywall, and thus he tried to profit off of a titillating, heartless premise. Is it bad to celebrate an assassination by putting it behind a subscription gate? And that, well, that is as cynical as it gets, folks. Now, I should mention before anyone clutches their pearls, whether or not I can show this because it is behind a paywall. Now, here's the law in plain English. Under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act, fair use allows commentary and criticism to quote from copyrighted works when the use is transformative, meaning I'm adding new meaning, analysis, or context rather than just republishing. Courts weigh 4 factors, and I'm squarely within each one. Number 1, purpose and character. The segment uses short excerpts solely for critique and analysis, not as entertainment substitutes. Number 2, nature of the work. It's a published audiovisual piece which favors limited quotation for comment. Number 3, amount is substantiality. I will use only what is reasonably necessary to make my point, not gratuitous or continuous chunks, and I will not lift the heart of the work beyond what this critique requires. And number 4, the market effect. This does not replace his video, does not supply viewers with a free competing copy, and therefore does not usurp his market. Paywall status doesn't cancel fair use. It only means access must be lawful. I am not bypassing technical protection or using a leaked copy, not ripping or scraping, no circumventing, which keeps me clear of the DMCA's anti-circumvention rules. That's 17 U.S. 1201. And while a platform's terms might try to limit redistribution by members, private contracts don't erase statutory fair use for transformative commentary. At most, they govern access conditions, not my right to quote small portions for critique. That's why you'll see me pause frequently, intersperse narration, attribute the source, keep clips short and necessary, and avoid anything that could serve as a substitute for the original. Lawful access, transformative purpose, minimal necessary use, and no market substitution, folks. You heard that? And as for Ryan, since I know that either you or your fans may see this, let me just say this directly. If your feelings are hurt by my responding to your members-only upload, be a man and make it public. If you stand by what you said, own it in daylight. If you don't, then good luck hiding behind a paywall while you try to launder glee over a man's execution as a philosophical debate question. All that being said, let's just roll the tape, okay? And we'll take it piece by piece so no one misses a sleight of hand. We're going to slow down, define the terms, and expose exactly how the language of care is being used to justify the celebration of political violence. And we'll end by talking about what real, nonviolent action looks like when you're moved by righteous anger, building, not burning, persuading, not purging, and standing up for the truth even when the cost is high. Let's start rolling the clips.
I'm sure it will not be a surprise to any of you that I was not a fan of Charlie Kirk. He was definitely one of the biggest figures that was influencing young people to join the MAGA movement. And I definitely think he was one of the biggest contributors to this swing that we've seen with young men moving more towards the right wing. Since his death, I've seen a lot of people sort of whitewashing his image and acting like he was some sort of moderate conservative. Like the YouTuber Shoe on Head, who is supposedly on the left, tweeted that she thought he was a moderate conservative, but I definitely do not see Charlie Kirk as a moderate. He's talked about how he thinks rap music is a degenerate type of music that shouldn't be promoted in society. He's talked about how when he comes across black people in professional positions, he has to worry about how they might be DEI hires, and he's talked about how a bunch of black women are not cognitively capable enough for their jobs, and he openly talked about how he thought it was God's perfect law to stone gay people to death.
It says, by the way, Miss Rachel, you might want to crack open that Bible of yours. In a lesser referenced part of the same part of Scripture is in Leviticus 18, is that thou shalt lay with another man shall be stoned to death. Just saying. So, Miss Rachel, you quote Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. The chapter before affirms God's perfect law when it comes to sexual matters.
I don't see how these perspectives are quote-unquote moderate. Like, I was raised in what I would consider a moderate conservative household. My parents are very staunchly Christian, and they always voted Republican up until Trump just because they hate Trump as a person. But my parents have always been very anti-racist because they believe that the Bible talks about how God loves all of his children equally. ambiguity.
Well, there's a lot there, folks. We're going to take it one point at a time, and let's start with Ryan's framing that people are sort of whitewashing Charlie's image. Notice the hedge word, sort of. He can't just say it outright because he knows he's on thin ice from the get. This is what the left does rhetorically, folks. They move by inches. First it's sort of, then it's, well, maybe, then all of a sudden the narrative is completely rewritten. That's how they shift cultural memory over time. And ironically, he admits in the same breath that even people on his side, on the left, like Shoe on Head, recognized Charlie's impact. That's not whitewashing. That's acknowledging reality. You don't have to agree with someone to admit they influenced culture. Now, here's a deeper point, okay? Charlie didn't make young men conservative. He activated them. He gave a voice to something that was already happening under the surface. And the reason young men were primed for that shift wasn't because of Charlie. It was the cultural left. For over a decade, leftists have hammered the message that masculinity itself is toxic, that being a man is inherently oppressive. They've waged a cultural campaign to dismantle every traditional virtue tied to manhood, right? Take down the patriarchy. So get rid of strength, responsibility, stoicism, and replace them with shame and self-flagellation. Pair that with a Me Too era where legitimate predators like Weinstein were lumped together with men who had awkward dates or told off-color jokes, and you had an environment where being male was treated as the original sin. In fact, if I remember this correctly, during the height of the Me Too era, a group of women in media companies started circulating an unverified Google Doc blacklist in New York media circles that ruined careers overnight, often with zero evidence. Some women even admitted they were using it to kneecap rivals and move up the ladder. That's not justice, that's weaponized grievance. And guess what? Men noticed, and they left the left. Charlie didn't have to push them. He just had to welcome them. Now, soon after that, Ryan tries to delegitimize Charlie's politics by saying he wasn't a moderate conservative, but what's Ryan's definition of moderate? He never gives us one. He just asserts. That's a classic fallacy. He's moving the goalposts. If you actually map Charlie's positions, they were mainstream conservatism, federalism on abortion, limited government, free markets, a broadly libertarian stance on social issues like gay marriage. Trump's platform, which Charlie aligned with, was basically Reagan's in the 1980s. If that's not moderate by historical standards, then what is? Ryan doesn't want to define it because then he'd have to admit that Charlie actually fits the description he's saying he doesn't. But to make his case, Ryan then trots out 3 examples, none of which actually prove Ryan was extreme. First, it's the rap music comment. Now, obviously, out of context, Ryan wants you to think this was racially motivated by Charlie. In reality, Charlie criticized the glorification of drugs, violence, and nihilism in certain parts of rap culture. This is a common criticism from the right towards rap. And that's not racism. That's just a moral critique. And Ryan knows this. But the point of bringing it up is to plant that seed to say, see, he doesn't like rap, therefore racist. It's guilt by association, not an actual argument. Now, next, Ryan presents Charlie's DEI comment. Here, Ryan did the same trick. He frames it as if Charlie looked at a black professional and automatically assumed incompetence. It's not what Charlie said at all. His actual point was that DEI policies force you to wonder whether a person is there because of merit or because of a quota. It's not paranoia. That's the reality DEI created. When institutions openly say they are hiring and promoting based on identity markers first, merit is inevitably undermined. It's just logical, folks. You just got to look at it and you'll see it. People do notice this. And it's not racist to acknowledge that either. It's rational to demand that critical roles be filled by competence, not checkbox categories. Now, the third point that Ryan drags out is the Leviticus clip where Charlie is talking about stoning gay people. Again, out of context. Charlie was responding to Miss Rachel, quoting Leviticus about loving your neighbor. Charlie was pointing out the irony that the same book also contains much harsher laws Christians believed were fulfilled and transformed by Christ. Jesus himself said he came to fulfill the law of Moses, which is why Christians do not live under Old Testament Levitical codes. Charlie was highlighting the inconsistency of cherry-picking scripture, not calling for the death of gay people. In fact, there are multiple public debates where Charlie explicitly argues against hardline positions on homosexuality, defending the principle of love the sinner, hate the sin, and rejecting the state policing people's bedrooms. Ryan knows those clips exist, but they don't serve his narrative. That's why he never shows them. So let's take a second and connect the dots, okay? Why does Ryan do any of this? Why misrepresent Charlie as a racist who hated black people, as a bigot who wanted gay people executed? Because once you build that caricature, you can justify your own feelings of celebration at his death. You can tell yourself, see, he was a monster, so it's okay. That's the function of this straw man. It's not about Charlie, it's about Ryan's conscience. He's trying to launder his glee through pseudo-analysis, and this is incredibly clear in his appeal to authority when he says, I grew up in a conservative household, so I know what moderation is. That means absolutely nothing. Plenty of people grew up in conservative homes. It doesn't give you special insight, especially when you're willfully misrepresenting facts. This is a textbook appeal to authority fallacy, using personal background in place of evidence, and it's manipulative because it tries to make the audience feel like disagreeing with Ryan is disagreeing with real conservatives. It's just a cheap trick at the end of the day. But here's a larger cultural point, okay? This whole exercise, Ryan's struggle session about whether it's okay to celebrate an assassination, is not really about Charlie Kirk. It's about where the left is culturally. They are so ruled by feelings, so steeped in identity politics, and so convinced that words of violence, that actual violence against their political enemies becomes justifiable. This is the end point of moral relativism. When you teach for years that speech equals harm, that dissent equals oppression, and that certain identities are irredeemably guilty, you create a culture where killing someone can be reframed as justice. And that's why this matters. It's not just about Ryan Beard on YouTube. It's a window into how the left has reshaped discourse in media, in education, and most importantly, in public life. They control institutions. They write the cultural scripts, and then they gaslight the rest of us into thinking we're the radicals. But just look closely, folks, because who's actually celebrating this political murder, okay? Who's actually rationalizing bloodshed as catharsis? It's not the right. It's the left. And the more the left reveals that impulse, the more ordinary Americans, that being men, women, young, old, all walks of life, are waking up to the reality that the so-called empathy party is perfectly comfortable cheering for violence when it suits them. And that, folks, is the cultural rot we're currently dealing with. Not just dishonesty, not just hypocrisy, but the normalization of celebrating death wrapped in the language of justice. That's not empathy. That's barbarism.
And while my family might think it's a sin to act on gay attraction, for example, at least they still believe that you should love the sinner, hate the sin, you know? And my family would definitely never imply that gay people should be stoned to death. My point is, it feels like people have totally lost sight of what a moderate conservative actually is because conservatives have been moving so far to the right. Like, I guess you can see Charlie Kirk as a moderate conservative when you compare him to someone like Nick Fuentes, but in the past, fringe neo-Nazis like Nick Fuentes wouldn't have even been considered part of the Republican movement. Like, from my perspective, Charlie Kirk was pretty far right. Just because there are people who are even more farther right than him, that doesn't mean that he is somehow a moderate. The MAGA movement is not a moderate conservative movement. It's a far-right conservative movement, and it feels like people have lost sight of that. I think when people die, there can be this tendency to want to treat the people who died with respect, and I understand that tendency, but I don't think that means that we should whitewash the things a person said just because they die. Like, there have been multiple liberals who have been patting Charlie on the back because he engaged in debate and conversation, and isn't that great that he would talk to people and have debates with them? But Charlie Kirk didn't have debates with people to try to come to a deeper understanding of ideas or try to bring people together and advance public discourse or something. He came into debates with a very clear perspective, and his purpose with his debates was to push propaganda. And I guess you could say that everyone who talks about politics online sort of pushes propaganda to a certain extent, but you would never see Charlie in a debate be like, oh, I never thought of that. Maybe this left-wing perspective isn't actually as bad as I thought it was. No, if anyone ever called out his hypocrisy or exposed how he was wrong about something, he would just do mental gymnastics and logical fallacies to justify his positions. So I disagree with these liberals who think it was this amazing thing that Charlie Kirk did debates. I only really see debate as a good thing when both debaters are engaging in good faith. And I just don't really think that Charlie Kirk did engage in debates in good faith.
This is next level projection, folks, because what Ryan is doing here is accusing Charlie of being bad faith while he himself is running one of the most bad faith arguments you'll ever see. Just justifying his own glee over a man's assassination. Ryan sets the terms so that no matter what Charlie did, it is automatically wrong. And then he demands Charlie live up to some imagined standard of good faith that no one on his side ever meets. No one on the left is meeting these terms. That's the irony. Ryan is calling Charlie propaganda while doing propaganda himself. But let's tackle Ryan's debate point directly because it's central. Ryan says Charlie only debated to push propaganda, not to deepen understanding or advance discourse. Think about how absurd that framing is. What exactly does he think debate is supposed to be? Of course, you enter a debate with a point of view. Of course, you try to win people to your side. That's the entire purpose of argument in a free society. What Ryan really means is that Charlie was supposed to play by leftist rules. Charlie was supposed to show up, take his beating, and concede every point to his opponents. If Charlie had been a left-winger debating conservatives, Ryan would be applauding him as a courageous, persuasive, and bold man. But because Charlie was on the right, suddenly it's propaganda. That's not principle. That's just pure partisanship. And here's what Ryan conveniently leaves out. Charlie debated everyone, not just 19-year-olds at college campuses standing on Q&A lines, though that's who mostly showed up at campus events. Charlie debated college professors, academics, people with PhDs, authors, policy experts, even international audiences. There are videos of him on stage for over an hour, taking question after question from critics. Were all of those perfect? Of course not. Nobody wins every exchange, and Charlie didn't pretend to. But the fact that he kept showing up mattered. He believed in the value of conversation. He said over and over that if you shut down conversation, the alternative is violence. And tragically, the culture that tried to shut him up through ridicule and protest ended up celebrating violence against him in the end. That's the irony Ryan refuses to grapple with. Now, instead of doing that, Ryan then sneers at liberals who praise Charlie for engaging in debate at all. But that actually just ends up proving the point. Even critics recognize that Charlie had the guts to go into hostile rooms, take tough questions, and put his arguments out there. He wasn't hiding in an echo chamber like the Ryans of the world. And yes, that includes the Oxford debate that Ryan also mentions, an arena where Charlie walked into the lion's den on foreign soil, facing students who had prepared notes and questions for weeks, while he went in cold with no binder, no pre-written zingers, no staff prepping him. Whether Charlie won or not wasn't actually the point in that situation. The point was that he went, he showed up, he allowed himself to be challenged, and he even uploaded the clips where he didn't look great because the value was in the conversation. That's the opposite of hiding. Now compare that to Ryan. He cherry picks that specific Oxford debate, mocks Charlie for it, and pretends that represents the whole of Charlie's worth as a debater. That's not analysis. It's just confirmation bias. And that's the broader cultural lesson here, folks. People like Ryan are so consumed by their partisanship that they can't acknowledge their opponent's humanity. If a conservative debates, it's propaganda. If a conservative makes a point, it's bad faith. If a conservative wins, it's dishonest tactics. And when a conservative is assassinated, well, then it's suddenly a moral struggle session about whether you're allowed to be happy about it. That's not rational discourse. That's just tribal dehumanization. And let's be clear about what Ryan is doing when he labels Charlie far right. Okay? Ryan is shifting the scale to make himself look mainstream. In reality, Charlie's position lined up with standard Reagan and Trump conservatism. And look, folks, nobody should ever be so blinded by partisanship that they forget people's basic humanity. I mean, just the other day, for example, I was talking to a group of moderate Democrats in Burbank, and we didn't have a problem with each other at all. In fact, we had a very normal conversation. Sure, we didn't agree on everything, but that's just life. I'd say we saw eye to eye on about 85% of issues and disagreed on the other 15%. And those 15% were specifically the third rail topics. That's normal, folks. You're never going to agree with everybody. I don't even agree with every conservative on everything. Normal people, yes, I'm using that word deliberately, disagree, stay cordial, stay civil, and still treat each other with respect. And that's exactly what Charlie wanted to model. That's what he did. This entire video from Ryan is about one thing, tearing Charlie down so he can excuse the satisfaction he feels over Charlie's assassination. That's the through line. I keep coming back to this because it matters. The intent is obvious if you pay attention to how Ryan structured his argument. And I'm not speculating about Ryan's motives the way Ryan speculates about Charlie's. I'm pointing directly to Ryan's own words and framing. In Ryan's worldview, Charlie automatically becomes far right because Ryan himself is planted so far on the extreme left. And from that vantage point, anything short of endorsing his litmus test, like transing children, gets branded as far right. So the label says nothing real about Charlie, and the justification surely doesn't do it any service. In fact, all of it just reveals where Ryan is standing.
And on TikTok and on other social media platforms, I've been seeing a bunch of arguments break out between the people who are celebrating him getting assassinated and the people who are saying you shouldn't celebrate. And I would say that I have complicated feelings on this. My first instinct when thinking about this is that if Charlie Kirk is someone who said that it's God's perfect law to stone gay people, and I am someone who is bisexual, then Charlie Kirk is implying that it's part of God's perfect law to kill me because of who I'm attracted to. So part of me is like, well, I guess I'm glad that someone got to him before he could get to me. It feels very callous, but like, what else is supposed to be my response to someone who implied that at least at some point in history, it was good to stone people for who they were attracted to? But then after thinking about it a little bit more, I was like, isn't that sort of the same logic that Asmongold used against Palestinian people, where he said that he didn't care if these Palestinian people died because they were homophobic? And like, if we as leftists agree that it's stupid logic to justify killing Palestinians just because some of them might be homophobic, shouldn't that logic also apply to Charlie Kirk? And to be clear, I don't think that Charlie Kirk is analogous to innocent Palestinian civilians. There's a massive difference between someone using his platform to spread homophobic beliefs to millions of people and innocent civilians who might just happen to have homophobic beliefs because of the place they were raised in. Like, if someone tries to imply that Charlie Kirk is the same as an innocent Palestinian child, that is obviously like so insanely stupid. But if we strip away all of the context, I think it sort of reduces down to this question: is it good to celebrate the death of someone who has said that they would celebrate your death? And I think that is a difficult question to answer.
No, it's not.
Like, I'm someone who believes in universal healthcare, and universal healthcare means universal. It means that anyone can have it, even someone like Charlie Kirk or even someone like Nick Fuentes or any of these other crazy people. And I think you can go down a very dangerous road when you start to make your own empathy contingent on whether or not other people have empathy. I've seen a lot of people sharing this Charlie Kirk quote where he says that he doesn't like the word empathy.
But that was really difficult to watch, mainly because Ryan is doing somersaults to justify his logic while trying to keep some level of likability, which is strange in and of itself. But here's the thing, folks. This is the payoff for why he misrepresented Charlie's comments on stoning gay people. We see it right here. He twists the clip into a justification for saying, well, since Charlie supposedly wanted me dead, then I'm glad he's dead. That's the payoff. That's why Ryan framed Charlie that way in the first place, so he could arrive at this warped moral excuse for celebrating Charlie's assassination. And, of course, that's a complete misrepresentation of Charlie's actual point. Citing Levitical law does not mean you want people stoned to death. That's not how Christians read Scripture. You have to take it in the context of Christ fulfilling the law of Moses. That's a foundational distinction in Christianity. The old law is fulfilled through Christ, but Ryan ignores that because without stripping that context, he couldn't build his case. He needs the misrepresentation so he can tell himself, see, he wanted me dead, so it's fair to want him dead. Then Ryan drifts into the strange comparison between Charlie and Palestinian children, only to immediately start peeling it back. And that's the way leftists argue. They inch forward with something outrageous, then immediately hedge or backpedal so they can keep plausible deniability. Step forward, step back, insinuate, then soften. It's a tactic to insulate themselves from sounding as insane as they actually are. But the most insane part of this entire clip is when Ryan poses what he thinks is this profound moral question. He says, is it okay to celebrate the death of someone who said they would celebrate your death? First off, Charlie never said that. He never once said he would celebrate the death of gay people, or anyone else for that matter. Not in the clip Ryan showed, not anywhere. Even when citing Levitical law, Charlie wasn't saying, I'm glad gay people should be stoned. He was pointing out the irony of someone quoting Leviticus selectively, citing the verse about loving your neighbor while ignoring the verses about harsher penalties. And if you understand Christian theology, you know that Christians don't live under Old Testament law the same way. That's the whole point of Christ fulfilling the law in the first place. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I have to, folks. Because don't forget, there are countless videos of Charlie publicly defending gay people's rights to live freely, debating groypers who wanted the opposite, and saying government should stay out of people's bedrooms. But Ryan ignores all of that so he can keep his character intact.
I've seen a lot of people sharing this Charlie Kirk quote where he says that he doesn't like the word empathy. I can't stand the word empathy. I think empathy is a made-up new age term and it does a lot of damage. Sympathy is a better word because empathy means you are actually feeling what another person felt, and no one can feel what another person feels. So obviously I think the logic here is really dumb. Empathy doesn't mean you are like literally feeling the exact same feeling that another person is feeling. It just means that you're allowing yourself to experience a similar emotional state. Like allowing yourself to feel sadness when you see sadness being experienced by other people. But anyway, Charlie Kirk here is saying that he doesn't believe in empathy, so therefore should we not show him empathy because he doesn't believe in empathy? And I think the answer to that question is that we should still show him empathy even if he doesn't believe in it. Just like I would still give universal healthcare to someone who doesn't believe in universal healthcare, right? However, I think there's truth to the idea that it's possible to show too much empathy towards someone, and by showing someone too much empathy, you can end up being weak and easy to take advantage of. Because if people on the right know that people on the left are always going to be showing kindness and empathy to people, they can take advantage of that. And I also find it very funny and hypocritical that you see all these people on the right who right now are being like, how could these people on the left be so cold and callous towards Charlie Kirk's death? But then these are the same people who say that empathy is this pointless made-up concept and that we shouldn't show people empathy. Like, you have to choose one or the other. Either empathy is a worthwhile concept and we should be showing everyone empathy when they die, or empathy is this stupid made-up concept that people shouldn't care about. And it's these exact same right-wingers who have been making George Floyd jokes for years and not giving a fuck about school shootings and being just incredibly cold and callous towards anyone who dies, who are then turning around and expecting us to show empathy to Charlie Kirk because he was a good Christian man and a beautiful white father. So I think where I stand on it is, yes, I do feel some level of empathy towards Charlie Kirk because my moral principle is that I believe in showing empathy to everyone. However, fuck you to the people who are lecturing us about showing empathy when you have been showing absolutely no empathy for years.
Now, it's obvious to anyone who actually listens to Charlie's quote that he's talking about empathy in a political sense. He's not saying compassion itself is bad. He's pointing out how the left has weaponized empathy for political gain. That's why he prefers the word sympathy. And honestly, that distinction isn't crazy at all. Growing up, I even remember in Portuguese, we always used sympathy, not empathy, to describe the same feeling. The word empathy, as it's used today, is relatively new. It only really entered mainstream political discourse in the past decade. So Charlie's critique was not about the way empathy has been redefined. So in essence, Charlie's critique was more about the way empathy has been redefined and politicized, not a rejection of basic human decency as Ryan tries to convince us. But Ryan surely doesn't present it that way. He pulls a quote out of context and uses it as a launch pad for a new line of attack. This is where the game becomes obvious. Ryan sets it up so he can elevate himself. He says, see, Charlie is a bad person because he rejects empathy. But me, I embrace empathy. So I'm a good and moral person. It's a self-congratulation disguised as analysis. And here's the irony. Ryan tips his hand by saying, my morality. That's the crux of leftism in full view, folks. That's moral relativism. It's weaponized morality. He talks as though his moral framework is unique to him, when in fact, the very principle he's leaning on, universal compassion, is not his invention at all. It's a Christian moral principle, the same Christian morality that built the society Ryan lives in, whether he acknowledges it or not. And that's important history, folks. Marx himself called religion the opiate of the masses and designed Marxism as a kind of substitute theology, a worldview that replaces God with the state. That's why leftists like Ryan feel comfortable hijacking Christian morality, stripping it of its source, and then parading it as their own enlightened principle. They don't recognize they're standing on Christian foundations even as they attack Christianity itself. So when Ryan claims the moral high ground here, he's borrowing it from the very tradition he mocks. Then he takes that misrepresented quote and blows it up into a broad generalization saying all conservatives, all Christians supposedly reject empathy. It's a straw man. Sure, some Christians, including Charlie, have critiqued the way empathy gets abused politically, but that doesn't mean Christians reject compassion altogether. In fact, many I've spoken to will say the opposite. They worry their empathy is being weaponized against them. That's a real discussion happening in churches right now. They don't want to abandon empathy. They want to protect it from being manipulated. That's a legitimate concern, not the caricature that Ryan is building here. Anyway, from there, Ryan shifts into another broad smear, claiming the right has been making George Floyd jokes for years and doesn't care about school shootings. This is where the dishonesty just goes off the charts. Yes, there are right-wing influencers who've made jokes about George Floyd, and there are people on the left who've made jokes as well. Jokes, tasteless or otherwise, do not define an entire political movement. And it's especially ironic that Ryan would choose to make this point about jokes after the whole hullabaloo with Jimmy Kimmel over the jokes he made accusing MAGA of shooting Charlie. That was what the left was hinging on. They're like, free speech is being suppressed. Oh my God, you can't make jokes anymore. The right wing is awful. And then Jimmy Kimmel got reinstated. And now Ryan and the left are once again policing jokes. Isn't that crazy? That little cycle that we always go through. Anyway, Ryan then claims conservatives don't care about school shootings, which is flat out false. Conservatives absolutely do care about school shootings. We just have a different solution. The left wants guns banned. The right sees it fundamentally as a mental health crisis. And here's the problem the left won't ever address. You can ban guns, but mentally ill individuals will still find ways to cause mass harm. I mean, just look at Japan. The assassination of Shinzo Abe happened with a handmade gun. Look at the UK, where guns are heavily restricted. Attackers resort to mass stabbings. Outlawing guns without addressing the mental health epidemic doesn't stop violence. That's the actual debate that the left doesn't want to have. And the reason why people like Ryan don't want to have it is because it requires nuance. It's much easier to smear the right as callous and cruel than actually dive into the discussion and provide real-world solutions. And that's the broader takeaway here, folks. What Ryan is doing here is pure propaganda. You strip context, you misrepresent quotes, you build straw men, smear entire groups with broad generalizations. This is how you vilify your opponents without ever engaging honestly with what they believe. It's not about understanding, it's about caricature and attack. And that's why this video, like much of leftist commentary today, lacks any real nuance or substance. It's not designed to grapple with truth. It's designed to just dehumanize your political opponents.
Maybe that's also how the parents feel when children die in school shootings. And if we're all feeling so sad about this gun death, maybe we could actually take some actions to help prevent stuff like this from happening in the future. Because this right-wing attitude of like giving your thoughts and prayers and feeling really sad and mourning, but then doing absolutely nothing to fix anything is bullshit. If you're feeling really sad about watching Charlie Kirk die, then channel that sadness into actually fixing things. But of course, when I say that, right-wingers are going to hear, oh, we need to channel this sadness into actually fixing things? Well, the best way to fix things is to start throwing leftists in prison. But no,
What?
I don't think throwing a bunch of leftists in prison is going to fix anything. That's
Who
just going to
said that?
turn up the dial of anger and intensity and resentment even more. And it is so ironic that the exact same people who have been whining about cancel culture for years are now engaging in cancel culture and trying to dox people and get people deplatformed or get them fired from their jobs if they said the wrong thing about Charlie Kirk. Would you have the same attitude towards someone making insensitive jokes towards George Floyd? If the answer is no, then maybe take a step back and reconsider what the fuck you're doing. I've just been incredibly scared and frustrated and disappointed with how things seem to just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And it feels like people on the left are stuck in this damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation, where if you choose to show kindness and empathy, people on the right then just walk all over you. But
what a
if you choose to
victim.
not show empathy and instead
what a
decide to be
victim you
callous
are.
and cold and do things like laugh about Charlie Kirk dying, people on the right will then engage in cancel culture and try to destroy your life. I think overall my perspective is we should never allow ourselves to turn off the empathetic parts of our brain, even towards bad people who don't deserve it. Because if we want to make the world a better place, that is going to require making the world a better place for bad people who do not deserve it. Or I guess you can take the route of just killing anyone who you consider a bad person, but then who gets to decide who dies and who doesn't die? Who gets to decide who is a bad person and isn't a bad person? Like, I think everyone would agree there is a certain line you cross where you just do deserve to die. Like, I think everyone would agree that Hitler deserved to die, and no one would have been sad if Hitler was shot, except for, the Nazis. But I guess in my head, I have a pretty high bar that someone has to cross before they get to that threshold where I'm like, okay, they need to die. Especially if I'm someone who is against the death penalty.
Is this guy retarded? Seriously. He literally just tried to justify murdering political opponents and then seconds later flipped around to say he's against the death penalty? Do these people even hear themselves? That kind of moral whiplash? Kill them. But wait, I'm against killing. Isn't nuanced. It's just cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance like that means you have no principles. It means you stand for nothing. It means you bend with the wind and you're easily manipulated. That's what these people are. Marxist shills who can be pushed around because they lack internal anchors. They're low impulse control men. And by the way, his whole thoughts and prayers attack, it's the laziest, most dishonest generalization the left drags out after every mass shooting. Ryan throws it out there right after calling conservatives unempathetic. But that phrase, my thoughts and prayers are with you, is one of the ways Christians and conservatives do show empathy. It's a way of saying my heart is with you in this hard moment. It doesn't mean that's all we do. To pretend otherwise is a straw man. In fact, there's several people on the right who are committed to stopping school violence. Take, for example, Andrew Pollack, who became an outspoken advocate for safer schools after losing his daughter Meadow in the Parkland shooting. He founded School Safety Grant and has worked tirelessly to push for stronger security measures on campuses. Another example is Hunter Pollack, Andrew's son, who's also been heavily involved in activism for better safety and accountability in schools. And then you have groups like the Heritage Foundation's School Safety Initiative and grassroots advocates such as Casey Hansen, a Utah teacher and concealed carry trainer who've argued for practical local solutions from trained resource officers to controlled access points to protect kids. And that's just 3 examples. So no, it doesn't stop at my thoughts and prayers. That, in fact, isn't just limited to mass shootings either. It's in every aspect of life. You lose a loved one, my thoughts and prayers are with you. You're applying for college, my thoughts and prayers are with you. You get audited by the IRS, my thoughts and prayers are with you. It's a gesture rooted in faith. Sure, it may not mean much to an atheist leftist, but prayer is real for Christians. It's how they petition God to intercede. And there's a principle in Christianity, prayer in action. If you only pray and never act, you're not following Christ. So building a straw man out of that is not just dishonest, it's actually kind of pathetic. Anyway, then Ryan lurches into cancel culture. He sneers about right-wingers, whining about it, then in the same breath accuses the right wing of using it, which is ironic because he himself cheers for right-wingers to be deplatformed. But by far, one of the craziest things that Ryan has said is the claim that leftists are being thrown in prison. Which leftists? For what exactly? Let's name names. Give us the cases. Otherwise, it's just inflammatory fear-mongering. This is the same tactic activists use when they scream that ICE is arresting American citizens. You dig into it, and not a single verifiable case holds up, except rare instances where someone, an American citizen, attacked a federal agent or was caught in actual immigration fraud. And yes, assaulting a federal agent is a felony. That's reality. Anyway, the rest of the monologue is just Ryan self-victimizing, saying, oh, poor me, the left is too kind, too empathetic, too nice. Yeah, believe that if you want. The same side that celebrates when political opponents are assassinated. The same side that shot up a Catholic church just a few months back. The same side that lets criminals with CVS receipt long rap sheets wander the streets to stab people on buses. That's the side we're supposed to believe is fragile and cowering. Please, spare us. But the true cherry on the cake is when Ryan starts posing his so-called deep questions. He says, maybe we should just kill anyone we consider a bad person, but then who gets to decide who dies? Here's a thought. How about we take killing out of the political conversation altogether? How about nobody gets to decide who deserves death for their politics? How about we get back to just shared morality, the universal principles of right and wrong? Because the left doesn't operate on eternal principles, and it's never been more obvious, folks. They shift with the wind. They decide good and bad by whatever serves their next power grab. Whoever stands in the way of evil and deserves to be crushed. That's not morality, okay? That's opportunism disguised as ethics. Anyway, the rest of the video is just Ryan making more straw man arguments and trying to present himself as some sort of victim. It's the same tired tactics with nothing new. So to bring it back to the top, leftism is a poisonous ideology. It's a poison because there has never been a single society in history that was able to function on the ideals of Marx. Not one. They all end up collapsing into authoritarianism. And it's highly ironic that the left loves to call the right fascist when if you actually look at the history of fascism, you see where it came from. Take Benito Mussolini, for example. He started out as a socialist. Then he became a fascist. And when he made that shift, the only thing that actually changed was he added an ethno-nationalist component to his socialism. But the core structure of the state didn't change. The state still controlled the means of production just like in socialism. The centralized control was still the same. So it was effectively just a rebranding. And suddenly it became fascism. That's how close these two systems, socialism and fascism, are. So when you start realizing that, when you start noticing how the left operates, you see that 90% of their rhetorical tactics are just pure projection. They accuse the other side of doing exactly what they themselves are already doing. And they do it to get ahead of the narrative, so that by the time the right points out what the left is actually doing, the left has already inoculated their own audience against it. That's the game, folks. And that's exactly what Ryan is doing here. The whole point of his video is not to honestly wrestle with morality. It's to create a structure of permission. He wants to give his audience soft permission to celebrate Charlie Kirk's death. That's the goal with this kind of content, to let them go through their own internal process of, oh, this person was killed. Should I feel joy about it? Is it okay if I do? And then give them the green light to say yes. This is what the left thrives on, this gray area of morality where they pretend to be the ones with all the empathy, all the nuance, all the evolved compassion. But when you strip away the language, the question they're really debating is the most basic one imaginable. Is it okay to celebrate somebody's murder because you disagreed with them? And their answer, after all their hemming and hawing, is always yes. So if you actually need to spend 20 minutes debating that kind of question, the truth is you already want to give yourself permission to celebrate it. And you want to give your audience permission to celebrate it too. And if you go and read the comments on his video, that's exactly what you see. People saying, yeah, I felt that way too. People admitting they had that same rush of joy. This isn't moral reflection. It's validation for indulging in the ugliest instinct. So it's never been more evident that the left loves assassinations. And that's not even a hypothetical. We've seen it play out earlier this year. The left openly celebrated when Luigi Mangione assassinated the United Healthcare CEO. They said the man was a mass murderer just for being the head of that company. That's the same logic Ryan is playing with here. If someone is in the way, if someone holds a position of influence that the left doesn't like, then that person is evil. And if that person is evil, then violence against them is not only excused, it's somehow morally righteous. That's how they frame it. And that's where this leads. I don't know where this ends, folks, but I do know this. Giving audiences permission to feel joy about political violence does not calm things down. It heightens the tension. It raises the stakes. And you can only push people so far. Now, I'm not saying this to recommend what Ryan is suggesting here, violence. I'm saying it as a simple observation about human nature. You push people far enough, and eventually they push back. That's just reality. But here's the bottom line. Murder is evil. Always has been, and that's not up for debate. That's why even in ancient Babylon, they wrote into stone, an eye for an eye. They understood the seriousness of life and death. They understood that taking a life could only be justified in the narrowest, clearest of cases. But the left doesn't want that. They want violence without consequence. They want to be able to unleash it for political gain and then demand that you not only accept it, but cheer it. And let me be clear. I am against violence. Most of the people I know are against violence. So look, all that being said, I'm at a point where all I feel like I can do is pray for this country because the road we're on right now is a biblical road. We've seen it before in history, and it never ends well. And I pray for Ryan as well. He's lost. He's built his whole identity around his sexuality and his victimhood, and that's just sad, to be honest. I hope this man finds peace. But for the rest of you watching this, don't let these guys normalize celebrating death. Don't let them sell you cruelty as compassion. You either have principles or you don't. And if you have to sit around and spend 20 minutes debating whether it's okay to celebrate someone's murder, then deep down, you already know the answer. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.